are these people?
So last week, me and Collin covered a little bit of the continued story of, Christian Smalls and his adventures, and talked about.
It needs to be a children's show.
I mean,
Yes.
it wasn't necessarily about Chris Smalls. It's just
he showed up at an event that the AFT was holding.
Is very shit-libby, basically.
Yes, the American Federation of which I just saw recently. He's got a thing with Bernie Sanders, like old Bernie is throwing a party, I think, and he's showing up. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm sure there'll be some interesting speeches from that. But we have a bit of a continuation of that story about that AFT, correct, Collin?
Yes.
Okay. So this is from WSWS, right? And the American Federation of Teachers Convention in service of Americans' capitalism, COVID-19 cover-up, strike suppression, and war plans, which we covered essentially a lot of the measures that they had voted on last week.
Right. So
one of them including
goes into a little bit more specifics and the hypocrisy that you could find in each of those.
Cool. I love Pacifics.
Resolutions that we kind of talked about a little bit last week, but this will go into a few of them more in depth.
So the American Federation of Teachers, the AFT, concluded its biannual convention on July 17th. The event held in Boston was characterized by a cover-up of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, support for U.S. imperialism's war against Russia, and an overall deepening of the union's integration with the capitalist state. It serves as a warning of the role that the union will play in suppressing the working class as the crisis of capitalism intensifies. Randi Weingarten, president of the AFT, set the tone for the event in her keynote address. Other high-profile speakers expressed the close collaboration between the capitalist state and the teachers' union. They included First Lady Jill Biden, Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and AFL-CIO President Liz Schuler. Their speeches revealed the nervousness of the union bureaucracy and Biden administration about containing the growing movement of the working class and confining it into a dead-end Democratic Party voting campaign. The speakers list also included ALU President Christian Smalls, the new darling of the AFL-CIO, which has embraced him in an effort to shore up its waning credibility. Do you see how they're writing about you? Sorry. You're the darling of the AFL-CIO, bro. You're like the class pet. Well,
no, but I think we said this in our Discord earlier today. He's he's basically a mascot.
Yes.
Basically.
In
terms of
right. He's the union mascot, essentially.
Right.
Like they might get a Christian Smalls mascot any day now and start using it,
Or we're gonna have like tax the rich Christian Smalls t-shirts. We're gonna have like little Christian Smalls bobbleheads. They're going to sell it on both.
I'm sure that's coming. That's coming.
I'll buy one. I'll do it up.
You'll see it in Walmart's, Target.
We'll get a big cardboard cutout, put it back here. So
tax the rich.
They also talked about the COVID-19 pandemic. Weingarten acknowledged in her speech the unprecedented crisis facing educators and the American democracy as a whole, citing the pandemic, the January 6th coup attempt, the war in Ukraine, and the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade. She asked for a moment of silence for those who have lost. What took their lives and how many were lost, she did not say. In fact, thousands of educators and school workers have died from COVID-19 since school reopened in August 2020. According to an unofficial tracker, no official tally has been released by either the AFT or the teachers union. The NEA, which also held its convention this month, over 14 million children have been infected and at least 17,000 have died, according to the CDC. The vast majority of infections and deaths occurred after September 2021, when children and educators were forced back into classrooms during the Delta and then Omicron waves. This policy was demanded by the Biden administration and ruthlessly enforced by the AFT. So, whitewashing her own culpability in the deadly school reopening campaign, Weingarten said that during the pandemic, our members rolled up our sleeves to make in-person learning safe and welcoming. The AFT embarked on an unprecedented Back to School for All campaign last summer, giving $5 million in grants to 1,800 AFT affiliates, serving some 20 million students. It was Weingarten herself who boasted that she spent 15 hours a day coercing educators and parents to return to unsafe classrooms. The AFT rank and file memberships, meanwhile, raged a concerted struggle to keep schools known to be central locations of viral transmission remote. Weingarten's admission to visiting 150K work sites in the last 14 months is telling. Throughout January and February, thousands of educators and students staged walkouts in dozens of cities. Many of these were wildcat, organized independently or in defiance of the unions. In places where the unions were forced to call a temporary strike, they immediately sought to stifle and sabotage the struggle of teachers. Collin, you're a teacher. Thoughts so far?
Sure. I mean, yeah, because shit, I wasn't even this was way before the network was even founded. But yeah, this was such a huge deal really into the summer through last fall in terms of teachers and families feeling very unsafe to return to school because, like that time, we were going through Delta. A lot of the issues that teachers were sharing were not necessarily addressed in terms of, certain schools may not have windows that would open, so like to ventilate air. Like some schools that may, have been more renovated within the last 10 to 20 years, the HVAC units may not be working correctly. Actually, in my school, our HVAC units were not working for the first maybe 2 weeks of school. So they had to install like these big ass AC units, like the floor ones, and install those in the classrooms, so while they tried to get the HVAC systems fixed. But yeah, I mean, like, I think it was just, and I think even in my district, they trying to give the guise of, we have to return to school, amount of learning loss and all this kind of stuff. But there was no one necessarily addressed the idea of how unsafe teachers and some families felt, especially for children, who may have health issues about returning to school. But I think it was just in the guise of, okay, we have the vaccine, and at that point, children like of a certain age were able to get vaccinated. So go in and everything's back to normal. And I think I've said this a lot, like the idea of this past school year, they tried to make everything back to normal, but giving us twice the workload to kind of catch up, but also kind of see where the holes might be as far as children's learning, right. Was ridiculous. And then, but ultimately, I don't know the numbers, but I think I've definitely within the last couple of years have been more teachers who've been either retiring or leaving the profession in record numbers. So I think it just kind of makes sense that we're hearing from the people at the top, that you have to go back. Whereas on the ground, especially for teachers and families and students, there were concerns that were not necessarily addressed. So, I mean, it makes sense that, the EFT tried to cover this up, saying, oh, everything's all good, when that wasn't necessarily the case. And then,
Homo style.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of teachers unions, they have no power. Teachers have no power. Like in my district, I can't strike. I can't protest.
Really?
No.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, you guys can't go on strike. Is there a teacher?
It's because of the teachers union. Yeah.
Yes.
Like my mother would have the same problem. You can't go on strike without consent from them if you're in the union.
Right.
Which most teachers join a lot of teachers join. I don't know the statistics for educators who are and aren't in it, but
Would you say the majority of districts in America are like drastically underfunded?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What, schools?
Yeah.
The majority of like their education.
Oh
system.
God, yeah. Because
Absolutely. Across the board, public school for sure.
That's what happens when public schools are funded by property taxes. So obviously for me, I work in more of an affluent area of DC. So like I basically work in the area where there's a lot of, in my case, a lot of politicians and world bankers and all that kind of stuff. So like they're
it's
more
funded well there.
Versus like even my neighborhood, which is right now where I live right now, is a little bit more gentrified. But, you know, but to the east of me, you know, is more low income. And so not many of those families are necessarily owning their homes, they're renting.
Yeah.
So, you know, so the idea that schools are funded basically essentially by your neighborhood and the economic value of your neighborhood really puts a strain, especially for low income schools or low income neighborhoods, of the resources that they or the things that they're able to do in those schools. You know, I would argue in not many of those schools, they probably need more help. But again, you know, that's affected by, you know, property taxes. So which, you know, in those areas are next to none, given that there's not many families that are owning anything in those neighborhoods.
And speaking of public schools, during her speech, Weingarten criticized the extremists, the anti-public schools crowd, the anti-union crowd, the privatizers, the haters. This begs the question, why did the AFT collaborate with these very extremists to promote school reopenings? In late September 2021, as the Delta wave was raging and adult and pediatric hospitals filled up across the country, Weingarten hosted a town hall event in partnership with far-right anti-public school parent groups Open Schools USA, which featured notorious pseudoscientist Dr. J. Bhattacharya and author of the Great Barrington Declaration, anti-mask COVID minimizer Tracy Beth Hoag. I love the framing from the WSWS here. You know, sometimes they're just terrible. But so it is noteworthy. Zordon, it's okay. It is noteworthy that the AFT convention required. I'm busy. I know there's putties in the park. I'll worry about it later. Required proof of vaccination, masks, as well as multiple negative COVID-19 tests for entry. None of these basic, though inadequate, measures are guaranteed to the millions of educators and school children in the U.S. over the past 6 months. The Biden administration has overseen the full dismantling of all mitigation measures, testing, and reporting infrastructure. Most of the major school districts opening in the coming weeks will not even require masks, despite a huge surge of the BA variant, which the administration had projected could infect 100 million people this fall, indicative of the vast chasm between the concerns of educators and the priorities of the union. Of the 36 resolutions adopted at the convention, not a single one was devoted to the pandemic. To the extent that the pandemic was even mentioned in the resolutions, no concrete measures were proposed to protect educators or students. So they also talked about the war in Ukraine. While no resolution was passed on the pandemic, the AFT did pass a resolution giving full-throated support to the U.S.-NATO proxy war against Russia. In her speech, Weingarten, who supported the CIA-backed coup in Ukraine in 2014, denounced Russian President Vladimir Putin as an oil gangster, but raised no criticism regarding Biden's meeting with Saudi Arabia's blood-drenched despot Mohammed bin Salman. The resolution reeks...
pipeline, right?
Yes.
What?
He wants to be an oil gangster.
Yes. The resolution reeks of imperialist lies and hypocrisy, in addition to covering up the well-documented role of neo-Nazis and fascists within the Ukrainian state and military. It accuses Russian forces of war crimes while ignoring evidence of war crimes on the part of the Ukrainian military. The resolution goes on to claim that the AFT affirms the fundamental principle that aggression should not be the answer to conflict among nations. Where was this peace-loving principle and the respect for sovereignty and democracy during the last 30 years as the U.S. waged endless wars in the Middle East and North Africa? Past AFT resolutions endorse U.S. imperialism's aggressive war against Afghanistan and Iraq. including one resolution from 2003 that fully embraced the lies of the Bush administration, demanding Iraqi President Saddam Hussein abandon weapons of mass destruction or else face unavoidable military conflict. So, a good batting average for the AFT in lighting up behind the Biden administration's promotion of this proxy war in Ukraine. The AFT seeks to pull a veil over the eyes of its membership as to the existential dangers the conflict poses. It did not mention that the escalation or the conflict fueled by the Biden administration threatens to spiral into a nuclear third world war, which threatens the annihilation of humanity. It supports the sanctions against Russia that have led to an international food crisis for billions of people, while assertively stating that U.S. has avoided direct U.S. military involvement, ignoring unprecedented levels of military assistance, including tens of billions of dollars in high-tech weaponry that will be paid for out of the pockets of American educators and the broader working class. That's your taxes, people. That be your taxes. Although the MMT people would just say that they're printing money for that. Which, yes. They are doing both.
They essentially are.
Yeah.
It's
Heller,
socialism for the rich.
E. Heller said in the chat, has the AFT made a declaration about the need for nationalized comprehensive universal health care for the U.S. yet? Nope.
No. What they did
that
mention
would be nice, though,
was the AFT's policies in relation to the pandemic and the war against Russia are dictated by the fact that the union, like the entire AFL-CIO, has become an appendage of American capitalism and specifically the Democratic Party. In concluding her speech, Weingarten spoke about the ongoing danger posed to American democracy in aftermath of the January 6th coup attempt, stating, "We may have seen our last free and fair election." She continued, "If this isn't a 10-alarm fire, I don't know what is." This is the most important last free election of your lifetime.
9/11.
Right.
Whoever wrote this, I forgot who wrote this article, but I think it's a woman, but she had fun with this. Like
Lois from Family Guy wrote this speech, though. I'm going to tell you right now. This is like straight up 9/11 and like fucking like, yay. That's funny. We may have seen our last free and fair election. If this isn't a 10-alarm fire, I don't know what is. We have one shot at changing this. Her only answer, however, is to vote for the Democratic Party harder. A party that continues to call the Republicans colleagues and has refused to arrest and prosecute Trump or his wide network of collaborators. So
I
fun.
I love how they're entertaining this idea that they're gonna arrest Trump in some sort of way. I really, it's kind of entertaining.
Oh well,
There's like this belief system. Where they've kind of hijacked the word democracy.
It's the beginning of the end. Haven't you heard?
Wait, that you can't hijack a word that it doesn't exist in this country.
Yeah, true. But Collin, it's a label, and you know how I feel about those. I take all the labels off all my stuff at the house. Like, you're not allowed to know what shit is. What's in that can? You don't know. Finally,
it's just a word in this country. It's basically just a definition of something that doesn't exist.
Yeah,
it's kind of like supercalifragilistic. It's just a word.
Right.
It's a dictionary definition.
To imagine that like any electoral like option at this point is going to like save you,
Andrew Yang just announced they're starting a new third party of
former Republicans and Democrats with him as a chair. Yeah, the Forward Party, and I agree, he's a loser.
Forward to destruction.
Yeah. So finally, the speech by Chris Smalls, whose ALU won a rare organizing victory at an Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, won so far, right? Just the one? Okay.
Just
wanted to make sure I got my numbers right for his like baseball card.
Yeah, 1 out of...
So New York sought to cultivate illusions in the union apparatus in the capitalist system. Smalls vaguely referred to a war going on outside and the other side is winning. If he were honest, he would say there is a class war going on between the capitalists and the workers, and that the capitalists are supported by the so-called labor unions and every other political organization that seek to bind the working class to the Democratic Party. Smalls asked the crowd to envision the following fantastical scenario. Imagine if Liz Schuler told the AFL-CIO, if Randy said, you know what, teachers don't go to work today. Imagine if everybody in the country, all unions, came together, if we all withheld our labor. They've had this power from the get. When are they going to use it?
Again, the idea that teachers unions cannot necessarily do that.
Yeah.
So
Who
there
put that
is
rule in place?
there is a problem. And
Why are unions stopping workers from organizing?
Because they
Why
want
is that a
control of the actions. Because that's essentially like, they've wrote tons of treaties and stuff along company lines, and you never know what things they've signed there.
That's kind of crazy. That's like a bakery shop, like have no cupcakes whatsoever.
Yeah.
No cupcake rule.
Right.
But the trade unions in the United States, as in every part of the world, are founded on reformist and nationalist politics and have degenerated under conditions of globalized production into corporate bodies defending their national capitalist class and the state against the strivings of the working class. This ever closer integration of the unions with the Biden administration is a conscious response based on their mutual fear of the growing movement of rank-and-file workers, which threatens to break free from the confines of the corporatist unions and develop into a mass movement against capitalism.
Okay, so in the posted this in the chat, but what about what happened in Brookline, Massachusetts? So
yes,
if any of you watched,
how did we miss that?
On Sunday, Indian Reef reported, an organization effort among Brookline teachers. So Brookline is a suburb outside Boston, Mass. Where essentially, they organized essentially for teachers to get better benefits, essentially. My take then is Brookline is a rich income area. So I think especially for those families in that area, in that town in particular, they have a mutual interest as far as making sure that teachers are getting what they need, because ultimately these are rich kids, My issue with, so I think as far as, how they organized, that could be something worthwhile exploring a little bit more, honestly, in
it was New York MAGA trace, by the way.
I think in the way that they kind of organized to get, the demands that they, wanted, I think was excellent. My critique on that is because this was a rich neighborhood, I can almost say they could afford to do that.
Yeah.
My thing would be like, how would that translate to, let's say, Boston, which is right next door, which is a more diverse area, but I think also includes low income. That is kind of where, it kind of falls flat for me, because it's not to say that the organization efforts is not there, but then I think it's the idea, in thinking of it as a class thing, like I think we can kind of see this, I think, especially in the media space, especially with larger, personalities, like they talk about, like, oh, like we need Medicare for all and all this kind of stuff. They like talking about the ideas in theory, outside of class. But when we mention class, and I think especially for a lot of these bigger personalities who are generally college educated, who are more in the professional management class, when we talk about class struggle, that will affect them. Like essentially, like people in the working class would be attacking them, because they are the people that, for the most part, do benefit from the capitalist system, even though they kind of say, oh, we believe in this or that and the other. So you notice that how, like, especially for these larger channels, they never talk about the class war at all. So in relation to that, I can kind of see that as far as, certain districts or certain towns, I think it's good to talk about a lot of these things, I think especially if you're more privileged, it's nice to talk about, educational equity and all that kind of stuff. But when you're talking about it in terms of class, especially those who are, more have more influence, or, they might feel that, oh, we're going to lose some shit if lower income people may need something else. So I think that's kind of where
that pie wedge mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the problem, in this. I think that's kind of the issue as far as organizing, because it's the idea of if we're talking about organizing, you have to talk about meeting people where they're at across class lines. So, which again, if you're in a position of privilege, you might be losing something in order to level the boats, so to speak, in the ocean, so to speak, which certain people may not necessarily want. They might say, oh, we again, I use Medicare for all. Oh, we like Medicare for all in theory and all that kind of stuff. Okay, let's organize for it. No, because, I think especially if you're talking about Medicare for all, it could mean they have to pay more taxes in order for that to happen.
God forbid.
When you're talking about education equity, there has to be something that, the upper class has to give up. Maybe, I don't know, I haven't necessarily thought about this, but that's kind of the attitude that, a lot of these people on the left, but if they're privileged, tend to think that they may not necessarily say out loud.
Gotcha.
So, to kind of defend your point before, Collin, early in the show, about why we have a particular organizing problem within this country. We seem to have sort of branded anti-capitalism in this very unique way, where it's okay to mention some things, but it's not okay to mention other things, especially when you talk about dividing amongst class lines and class war.
Right.
I don't think you necessarily see that in other countries.
No, but I think you don't see that in other countries, because either especially in places in the global south, they're just so poor that it's just well, we'll just fuck shit up because we don't have anything anyway. Or in certain cases in Europe, they have a lot of socialist programs already in place already. So they can be I don't care about I still have insurance, I still have time off, let's burn shit up. We don't have that, unfortunately, in this country. So those are the systems that people hold over you in terms of you're going to protest something, fine, we'll close down your employment, which has been happening, especially with Starbucks.
I mean, they've been weaponizing capitalism to the point of well, we'll just fire you or move, outsource that work or whatever, which, has been put in place by it seems like a lot of these orders are getting thrown from up a little higher than just our political things. Right. If you've been listening to your friends who make those fancy shiny hats, which you should do sometimes,